Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. On behalf of the Confidential Advocacy Program, I'd like to welcome you all to part 3 of this webinar series. My name is Stacy Spencer. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm one of the confidential advocates with the Confidential Advocacy Program, otherwise known as CAP. Today, we have the privilege to be joined by Ashley Carroll and Shannon Rose from Multnomah County for their presentation on advocating for survivors of violence living with disabilities. And before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the land that we live, work, and learn on in Portland, Oregon, and Multnomah County, where the traditional lands of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Wascow, Molalla, Cowlitz, and Watlala bands of the Chinook and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous people still connected to this land. If you are not in Portland, I encourage you to look up whose land you reside on and acknowledge their history. Now, before I introduce our speakers, I'm going to discuss CAP, how you can access our services, and inform you on ways you can get involved with the vital work that CAP does at OHSU. So none of the presenters today in this webinar or members of the CAP Conference Committee have anything to disclose this morning. And we recognize that speaking about violence may trigger you or bring up feelings and emotions that can be difficult to process. We are here for you, both during the webinar and after, and if you need someone to speak to. You're invited to call our support lines to be validated and connected with resources. Please note that CAP has 5 support lines throughout all 5 OHSU campus locations. During normal business hours, these numbers are answered by our team of advocates in Portland. After hours and on weekends, these numbers are routed to our community-based agencies and partners who serve those locations. In Portland, that's Call to Safety. In Monmouth, Sable House. In LeGrand, Shelter from the Storm. In Ashland, Community Works, and in Klamath Falls, Marta's House. Throughout today's webinar, Stephanie McClure, CAP's Program Manager, will be staffing the hotlines and will be able to provide you with support. We invite you to send questions for today's webinar to Jackson, our other confidential advocate, who will be monitoring our inbox at capsupport@ohsu.edu. Jackson will read your questions to our presenters during the Q&A section. We'll not be sharing any confidential or identifying information, so if you have any questions that needs an individual response, we will respond to you directly and not during the webinar. CAP advocates for OHSU members. Thank you. Today we have 2 ASL interpreters and captions available. We are so grateful for EdCom and Language Services for making this possible and ensuring this webinar is accessible. Each webinar will also be recorded. CAP advocates for OHSU members who are survivors of gender-based violence and sexual misconduct. Next slide, please. Thank you. CAP's mission is to center the voices of those who have experienced sexual misconduct CAP's mission is to center the voices of those who have experienced sexual misconduct through education, advocacy, empowerment, connection, and support. We do this work by employing our values, which include social justice, intersectionality, inclusion and equity, self-determination, safety, and health. We recognize that when we center the voices of those most vulnerable, we can improve support for all. Currently, CAP is offering free virtual trauma-informed yoga. Our sessions are held on Tuesdays from 12:15 to 12:45 and are recorded for later viewing. However, no participant information will be part of the recording to ensure confidentiality. And if you're interested in signing up, please contact us through our CAP support email. We also invite all OHSU members who are survivors of harassment, discrimination, and violence to join our Survivor Voices project and collectively assist CAP in advocating for survivor needs, resources, build community, and help us identify additional ways to support our community. If you have ideas for things that would be helpful for survivors, we would love to hear from you. We are also looking for members for our advisory council for the Survivor Voices project. The purpose of this council is to increase transparency of our Survivor Voices project and to make sure we are accountable to and amplifying the voices of communities who experience the highest levels of violence. We invite members of the Black, Indigenous, and people of color community, members of the LGBTQIA+ community, and people living with disabilities at OHSU to join. And I want to be very clear that neither the Survivor Voices Project or the Advisory Council are work groups. CAP staff and volunteers will be doing the work. Rather, this is a space for us to build community and identify actions and to center the voices of those most impacted by violence. And lastly, we would like to invite anyone who would like to volunteer with CAP to reach out to us and help us with this vital work at OHSU. And again, if you have any questions during today's webinar, please email capsupport@ohsu.edu. Jackson will be monitoring the inbox and will read these questions during the Q&A. If you need additional support, Stephanie will be monitoring our hotline at 833-495-2277. Now, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Ashley Carroll, pronouns she, her, received her bachelor's and master's in social work from Portland State University. Ashley worked in the domestic and sexual violence field for over 10 years, mostly in a systems coordination role housed in local government. Most recently, Ashley was Domestic Violence and Disability Program Specialist with the Multnomah County Domestic and Sexual Violence Coordination Office, coordinating McNeff's Open Doors for Survivors with Disabilities. Ashley recently began a new role with Multnomah County's Office of Diversity and Equity as a Disability Resource Specialist. Ashley is an outspoken mental health advocate and serves as the Vice President of Education and Support for NAMI Clackamas. When Ashley is not working or speaking, you can find her enjoying time with her husband and 2 daughters, on her yoga mat, listening to audiobooks, or going to therapy. And Shannon Rose, pronouns she, her, is a Senior Program Specialist with the Multnomah County Domestic and Sexual Violence Coordination Office. Shannon has worked with and advocated alongside trauma survivors for over 15 years. In her current role, she guides education and policy efforts to ensure that survivors of violence have trauma-informed and survivor-centered services within Multnomah County. She is particularly passionate about the impacts of violence and trauma on individual and community health and wellness, as well as creating systems of care and resources that are equitable, accessible, and responsive to both those that they serve and those that they work within them. She has a master's degree in human services and graduate certificates in trauma-informed care, addictions counseling, and project management. Thank you, Ashley and Shannon, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our presenters today.
Hello, my name is Ashley Carroll. I use she, her pronouns. One of the things that we're going to try to do today, Shannon and myself, is really model an accessible presentation as best we can. And so one of the things we do when we're presenting as accessibly as possible is to explain all the visuals on the slides. So please expect that from us today. I'm going to start by explaining that there is a slide with my picture and Shannon's picture, and it says who we are. And I'm going to introduce myself in the non-bio way. So my name is Ashley Carroll, and I identify as a person with a disability. So I have lived with mental health diagnoses since I was 16 years old. And they've included many different things over the years, but I would say that they mostly include bipolar, eating disorders, and substance use disorder stuff. And so when we talk about living with disabilities, that I am bringing some lived experience to this table today. And yeah, I've been in the domestic violence field for about 10 years and recently moved to doing more equity related work at Multnomah County, focused on the intersection of disability and race, LGBTQ status, et cetera, really focused on the intersection of disability and other marginalized identities. Shannon?
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks, Stacy. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, Stacy did a wonderful job of reading our bio. I'm going to tell you just a little bit more about me. So again, my name is Shannon Rose, and I do use she, her pronouns. As you heard, I've worked in the domestic and sexual violence field for well over 15 years now. I was fortunate enough to get my start working in shelters, on hotlines, all the traditional ways that advocates tend to start in the field. and am now doing more systems level work around policy and training. From a lived experience perspective, I do also want to share, I grew up in a household where power and control was present, and also saw ramifications of that from my grandparents. So it was definitely family and intergenerational as I grew up. As far as lived experience with disability, just over 2 years ago, I experienced sudden hearing loss, and I'm now a person who is single-sided deaf. So for the past 2 years, I've been navigating both work with survivors as well as my own personal experience with healthcare systems and providers as a midlife person who experienced a sudden new disability. So that will definitely be informing, I think, the presentation today as well, as far as my perspective and my take on things. Thank you.
I will also add, for technological considerations, that this is our first COVID training for Shannon and I. While we have done webinars in the past, not necessarily like this, and I have 3 screens here, and I'm also moving slides, so if things are a little slow, just a little grace around that. And if I'm looking at the wrong place, that's what I'm looking at. So Shannon's going to talk a little about what to expect.
Yes, this is just a quick sort of grounding for us here as we jump into the material. We want to let people know that we are going to cover a lot, but we do have a limited amount of time, and there's a lot that we won't get to today. So if you'd like to connect further with either of us, if you have questions that don't get answered on the webinar, or just want to chat more about the material and resources, feel free to get in touch. Our phone numbers and emails are on that front slide, and we do welcome connecting with you. As Stacy said in the beginning as well, the content can be difficult and triggering because we will be talking about violence and trauma. And so, of course, we welcome you to do whatever you need to do. If you need to step away from the webinar and take care of yourself, we wholeheartedly encourage that. We will try our best as well to avoid jargon and acronyms through this training. And we don't have a live chat to know right away if we mess up. So if we do mess up, and we say something that you're not familiar with, please feel free to send that email in, and we can at least try to answer it at the end of the presentation today during the Q&A. And then finally, that is the time when we'll address questions. We also know that more questions may come in than we have time for. So again, just feel free to reach out if there's more after today that you want to talk about. All right, so we are going to jump right in with just a little bit of grounding. I want to make sure there's probably, in my mind, a varying level of knowledge and experience with domestic and sexual violence for the folks who are watching and listening to this today. And so I just want to give us a little bit of grounding to make sure we're all operating from the same place. So you'll see here on the screen, we have our sort of standard definition of domestic violence that many of you might be familiar with. Domestic violence is a pattern of coercive, controlling, or abusive behavior that is used by one person to gain or maintain power and control over another person. When we talk about domestic violence in our work and at Multnomah County, we do include family violence. We include violence of basically anyone living in a family, intimate, or home relationship. So we sometimes will distinguish between DV, domestic violence, which is that sort of larger, all-encompassing definition, and then IPV, or intimate partner violence, which is, of course, that same type of violence committed by a current or former intimate partner. And that's an important distinction to make, I think, as we go through this training, because for a lot of people living with disabilities, they are experiencing violence both from an intimate partner, but also sometimes from other family members, caregivers, other people in their homes. And we don't always talk about that in the IPV, intimate partner violence field. Second, I just want to give you a couple of pieces of information about the way that I will use language today, just to clarify so that you know where I'm coming from. I use the term survivor and victim pretty interchangeably when I talk about domestic and sexual and intimate partner violence. And the reason for that is simply because over the years, I've heard from so many people that they may identify with both of those terms or one or the other at any part along their sort of journey of experiencing this violence and healing from violence. So I want to represent that spectrum. Second, I will also use interchangeable pronouns. Oh, look, my cat wants to make an appearance. I will also use interchangeable pronouns, she, he, they, throughout the training and throughout the presentation to represent that all genders experience violence and use violence. At the same time, we also know that the overwhelming majority of survivors and victims are female, including both cisgender female and transgender female individuals in our community. And we'll talk a little bit more about that data shortly and how that makes a difference when we're talking about statistics.
I'm going to talk a little bit about language and definitions in regards to disability. Referring to someone as disabled or a person with a disability, right? Which way do you do it? Which way is right? Unfortunately, I'm here to say the right way to do it is whatever the person describes themselves as, which means that you might not know at first. So what we've learned in the disability field, like up to date today, is that there is no one agreed upon way. So identity first is putting the disability as an integral part of someone's identity. The autism community or the people who live on the spectrum tend to have like a prideful feeling about their disability, or potentially a feeling that they can't separate themselves from their disability, that they are that their disability is part of them, and wanting to own that and saying, I am autistic, I live on the spectrum, I am disabled. The other school of thought is to see someone as a person first and their disability second, and therefore use person first language. And so person first language sounds like, I am a person with a disability, I am a person with bipolar disorder, I am a person who uses a wheelchair, right? And some people really find that to be more respectful. And so I have in the past often told people to default to person first language, to saying person with a disability if they don't know. That could be a good way for you to default, but please listen to the language someone else is using and echo that back to them as best you can. If you're writing about disability, what I try to do is use a variety of approaches. So I will use the term disabled, and I will also use the term person with a disability. That is something that is likely role modeled throughout this presentation. I will tell you that if you ever work with a communications person or someone who is following a style guide, they hate when we do multiple approaches to language. So as a disability advocate, I always push back against that and say that this is what the disability community wants. So the definition of disability is another kind of like complex and gray concept because disability definitions really vary. So when we're talking about Social Security, that's a very stringent definition that has to do with being unable to work for a certain period of time. We don't have a lot of flexibility around the definition of Social Security when we're trying to get folks on, I almost said SSI, SSDI, when we're trying to get folks on Social Security in terms of Social Security disability. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, defines disability as any limitation to a major, any major life limitation, right? So if you take like antidepressant medication, then there is a limitation in the way that your brain processes certain chemicals, and you are considered a person with a disability under the ADA. And I think a lot of people are considered under the ADA to be a person with a disability who don't consider themselves to be a person with a disability, which is an additional really barrier to consider when we're talking about who is disabled or who has disabilities, because often we would consider someone to have a disability, but they don't consider themselves to fall under this umbrella. And so sometimes we are having to do some education around what is considered a disability, and sometimes we have to let people self-define. And so that is the best practice at the end in the bold on this slide. It says best practice is to let people self-define as disabled or not. And then there is the World Health Organization definition, which I particularly like because it really defines disability as being a social construct. So if everything was accessible physically, emotionally. We're going to talk about accessibility later and everything that entails. But if everything was accessible, would disability still exist? Or is disability the fact that we don't have curb cuts so people using wheelchairs can't get around? Is disability because we have attitudes that don't welcome people and then people with disabilities are excluded, right? So I really appreciate the World Health Organization definition. And then lastly on this slide, there's a big 20%. And what that is telling us or reminding us is that 20% of people live with at least one disability. Many people living with multiple disabilities. And what I think folks often forget is that disability is the largest marginalized population of all the marginalized groups. We're the most overrepresented, and we're often like, we're not a monolith at all, right? We're so many different disabilities. We cross race lines, socioeconomic lines, gender lines, sexual orientation lines, religion lines, and you can join our class at any time, right? So like I think of Shannon's story of becoming a person who's single-sided deaf midlife, right? That's not an uncommon situation where someone becomes a person with a disability later in life. So what does this look like, and how could you be a part of this? Sometimes we use the term temporarily able-bodied, right? So maybe think about that today and what that means for you and the people you're working with. I'm going to take a very quick drink of water. This next slide is called Types of Disabilities, and it has a visual at the top that basically divides disability into 4 different categories. There's a few different ways to categorize types of disabilities, and so I provided 2 different ways here because some ways click with some people and some ways don't click as well. So the visual says that there's 4 types of disability, and the first is a visual, and so it actually says the word visual and it has an I crossed out on top. So as if a type of disability might be a visual disability. Another type of disability might be an auditory disability, and so there is a picture of an ear crossed out. Mobility or dexterity disabilities, there's a picture of 2 hands quite close to each other. And lastly, there's a picture of a head with a brain inside with a question mark, and it says cognitive disabilities. So that's one way to classify different disabilities, is like there's visual, there's auditory, there's mobility and dexterity, and then there's cognition. I actually prefer to break it down a little bit more than that. So I've quickly on this slide broken down physical disabilities. So that's kind of what we generally think about when we think of disability, I would say. Potentially missing or amputated limb, someone who has been paralyzed, fibromyalgia, other physical conditions that affect someone's daily living, really. And then there's developmental disabilities. This could be spectrum disorder disabilities like autism or what was formerly called Asperger's. Down syndrome, cerebral palsy are examples of developmental or intellectual disabilities, as they're often called. Sensory disabilities are disabilities affecting your 5 senses. So vision loss, hearing loss, or deafness. Multiple chemical sensitivity is one that I'm hearing more and more about as people are very sensitive to scent. And obviously noise sensitivity, loss of taste, as we're hearing with COVID quite often. And then another type of disability is cognitive. So dementia, Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injury. And lastly, mental health as a kind of umbrella term covering schizophrenia, bipolar, anxiety or phobias, and depression. You may see yourself on this list. I think that a lot of people don't understand how broad the term disability is and how much it really encompasses so many different things. Now we're going to talk about accessibility. So I love to talk about accessibility because I think I didn't understand when I was learning about it how all-encompassing it really is. So I kind of define accessibility as this umbrella term for access. And what I have written at the bottom of the slide here is no access equals no patient. And I would love for you to take that home with you today, or maybe you're already home, so keep it at home. If there's not accessibility, you're just not going to see the patients. And so you won't even know that there wasn't accessibility most of the time. But what is accessibility, right? So I think when we think about accessibility, we think about physical access. So physical access is buildings, ramps, elevators, bathrooms. Do not forget about bathrooms. If you have someone there for any length of time, there needs to be access to an accessible bathroom. Transit. I can't see the end because there's a camera in the way now. Transit to your location, and then from the transit drop-off site to your location, right? And so on your website, does it say what transit comes nearby and what transit is accessible and what the journey is from the transit drop-off site into your office, through your waiting room, whatever that looks like. But it's not just physical access, right? So accessibility is also material access. Are your flyers accessible? Are they in multiple languages? How big is the font? Is the font on top of a picture, which lowers the contrast and makes it inaccessible for someone with low vision or color blindness? Pamphlets that you hand out, forms that folks are filling out, even records. How accessible is all this? Is it accessible to people who use screen readers? Do you have everything in an electronic format? And is it an electronic format that can be readable by a screen reader? Virtual access, so that's a big deal right now. Is your website accessible? Again, the screen reader consideration is quite high. Is your telehealth accessible? The resource page that you have on your website, events that you hold like this one today, do you have an interpreter? Do you have captioning services? Are you sending your materials out ahead of time so that people with screen readers or who have, trauma histories can review? Emotional access is a consideration that I think we don't associate with accessibility. So has staff been trained on working with people with disabilities so that they feel confident that they can meet folks' needs when they come in the door? And are providers aware of previous interactions that this person has likely had as someone living with a disability? So are you considering that maybe the previous doctor's appointment or the previous blood draw didn't go so well, and how can you overcome whatever trauma this person has from interacting with the medical system? Other things to consider: policies. Sometimes eligibility policies can exclude people. I think of, I think I'm going to talk about it in different slides. I'm not going to talk about it right now. So policies can exclude people, insurance coverage. So who does and doesn't have access to the services that you're even providing. And is staff representative of the population you're serving? So if you're serving people with disabilities, do they get to see people with disabilities in your waiting room, in the doctor's room? Are they represented to see people like themselves when they're being served? That was a lot of me talking. So Shannon's going to talk about prevalence.
All right. So for our folks out there watching and listening who like numbers, we're going to do just a little bit of focus here on prevalence and talking about who's actually experiencing this, how many folks are actually experiencing violence, how many folks are experiencing disability and trauma. And just to model, as Ashley has as well, on this slide, there is an image at the top with just a whole row of different people, humans in different types of dress, different races and skin colors, just to represent the sort of breadth of what disability and what trauma and violence look like. It affects all of us and it affects everyone. So we know that when we're talking about domestic violence, that we do have some really, really good data, right? And we know that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 7 men will experience physical abuse from a partner in their lifetime. Now, I do want to break down that a little bit. So this statistic, which is probably our most well-documented statistic in domestic violence circles, really only looks at physical violence. And when we're talking about power and control, when we're talking about that full spectrum of relationship violence, we're also talking about sexual abuse, verbal abuse, psychological abuse. We see economic abuse as a very, very common tactic of power and control in many relationships. We see spiritual abuse, where people's beliefs and practices are being targeted. So there is a whole spectrum of types of violence and tactics of violence that aren't even included in the statistic. And we know that if we were to add those in, those numbers would probably be even greater. The other thing I want to say about this data is that when you're looking at statistics around domestic violence, it's really important to look at who was that data gathered from and how did they get it. because gender identity and sexual orientation also really make a difference. A lot of times when we talk about domestic violence, the image that tends to come to mind is a heterosexual, partnered, romantic relationship. And we know that domestic violence and sexual violence, they occur in all types of relationships, and again, amongst all communities. So we know that this statistic here, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 7 men, that tends to be your catch-all number. The thing that I like to point out is that when you're talking about relationships in the LGBTQ community, those statistics do shift a little bit, and that's important if that's a population that you're really working with and seeing often. So we know that in relationships where you have same-gendered partners, where you have transgender partners, so where this isn't just a traditional, what's been presented to us in the media around stereotypes of heterosexual couples, those numbers shift. And we do see that about 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 men and 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 women in same gender, same sex relationships experience domestic and sexual violence as well. So those numbers do change a bit. That also leads us into the second point that's on this slide that I really want to highlight, and Ashley's going to talk more about this in a minute, specifically in regards to disability. But we know that domestic violence is really a product of oppression in our society. There are other trainings that detail how that happens. And we know then that it's compounded by other oppressions. So sexism, racism, heterosexism, ableism, all of these other things change numbers and change your likelihood of experiencing domestic violence and your likelihood of getting help, of getting really empathetic, thoughtful assistance from our systems because of systemic racism and institutional oppressions. So one thing I don't like to share it because it's a horrible fact, but I think highlights this, is that when you're looking, for instance, at victims and survivors of domestic violence, and you're looking at how race compounds that, we know that if you are a Black or African American woman in this country, you are 3 times more likely to die from domestic violence than a white woman. That is not because you have done anything wrong. It is because racism and systemic racism is a risk factor for your health and well-being. So people who are Black or African American in our community often aren't believed as much, have a more difficult time getting support from systems, have traditionally had a more difficult time from law enforcement response, which is often what domestic violence survivors hear, go to law enforcement, call for help. So there's a lot of factors there at play. And so we want to keep that in mind as we go through this today as well, because depending on how you look, how you show up in the world, what your intersection of identity is, really impacts how you're going to be met, of course, whenever you disclose violence, whenever you come forward and maybe ask for assistance for your own safety and well-being. And so Ashley's going to take a look at that a little bit more, specifically in regards to disability as well.
Thanks, Shannon. So people with disabilities are more than three times as likely to experience serious violent crime, which includes rape, sexual assault, aggravated assault, and robbery, than are people without disabilities. So this isn't a specific to domestic violence crime. This is a more umbrella for all violent crimes, but people with disabilities are 3 times more likely to experience all violent crimes. And then 83% of women with disabilities will be sexually assaulted within their lifetimes. And the average is a very unfortunate average also, that is 1 in 3 for all women. So about 33% for all women, but 83% of women with disabilities. There's another statistic that I'm aware of that says that about 80, which is on par with this, 80% of women with developmental disabilities have been raped or will be raped. And of those percentages, of those 80%, that 50% will be raped 10 times or more, or sexually assaulted 10 times or more. It's not a one-time thing, right? I think that that's what's really hard, that it's like this systemic abuse that not only is less likely to be understood by the person on the receiving end of the abuse, when we're talking about sexual abuse, that folks might not have had education around what sexuality looks like, what healthy sexuality looks like. But 3% of the cases with folks with developmental disabilities are reported. So if we're thinking that 80% of women with developmental disabilities are sexually assaulted and 3% are ever reported, we're not seeing that. They're not showing up people are not going to show up in your office and say that's what's going on. You might not know to ask the question. And people are not working with Shannon tonight, right? People are not working with us. And so we know that there's a lot that's going on out there that we're just not seeing, that people are not disclosing to us for many reasons, which we will talk about a little bit more later. I'm going to talk a little bit about the intersection of disability and trauma. And we're going to kind of use trauma as a somewhat of a synonymous with domestic violence, because what we know is when someone is experiencing violence or abuse in any way, that it's basically an accumulation of trauma, right? So when we're talking about disability and trauma coming together, we're talking about working at this intersection, really. So I have a cycle on this slide. It's a visual. It says a vicious cycle in the middle. And it starts with a person experiencing trauma, chronic stress, or adversity. Many of us experience this in our lifetime. And then the person seeks help. So that might not always happen, but hopefully sometimes it does happen that a person is experiencing something and they seek help. The next step is, unfortunately, that the helping organization fails to recognize the trauma. So maybe someone comes in and they're they have a physical injury, but we don't recognize how that injury came to be, that it came to be as a result of domestic violence, right? The person might then be blamed and labeled. So they could be labeled clumsy. They could be labeled attention seeking. On the left of the slide, I have some ways that people get labeled. So people could be labeled aggressive, self-injurious, criminal, or at risk when we don't see the trauma that's underlying the behaviors or the symptoms that are presenting. The next thing on the vicious cycle is that then the person experiences further trauma. So if somebody's trauma isn't recognized and they're then labeled and blamed, that's additional trauma that just almost adds to the bucket. And then here you are experiencing more trauma, and we're back at the beginning of the cycle. Do you seek help again? Or do you not, right? So then we might have people not seeking help in the future because of previous system interactions. Basically, an increased likelihood for abuse. So remember, people with disabilities can be up to 3 times as likely to experience abuse, up to 10 times as likely to experience sexual abuse, is an increased likelihood for experiencing trauma. And so when we're talking about working with people who have experienced abuse, we're talking about working with people who have experienced trauma. This is the vicious cycle. Later, we're going to show you the better cycle. So this is just laying the groundwork.
So I want to highlight, as we continue to move through this, some of the challenges and opportunities that survivors report in healthcare settings. Now, I know, and I believe, because you all are here with us in this webinar, that you know these are issues, you know these are problems, and you want to do a good job, a better job, maybe help improve your systems at responding to survivors in your settings, right? I absolutely believe that to be true. And we know that survivors want that too. Research tells us really clearly that when you take family and friends aside, obviously survivors are most likely to disclose to a close friend or family member the abuse that may be happening. But with them out of the picture, the category next common is healthcare providers. So survivors will often disclose, and that can be any type of healthcare provider. I remember having a conversation with a phlebotomist once who talked to me about how often people would disclose to her in just the 5 or 10 minutes someone was sitting in their chair, because they were having conversations, trying to distract the person from the needle going in their arm, and things would come out. So this is showing up all over and throughout the healthcare system, as you all know and you see all the time. We also know that survivors actually want a safe space to be asked about it and to share about it. And so it's a really wonderful opportunity for folks in the healthcare system to provide that. And addressing some of the critical challenges that survivors have had in the past when they've disclosed or tried to disclose are one way to keep moving forward, right? So I've highlighted a few of those, some of the most common ones we hear on this slide. So as I've mentioned already, of course, systemic racism, institutionalized racism within healthcare. I don't think it is any secret to anyone here that there is a past that has led to trauma for a lot of people of color trying to access support and being a part of healthcare systems, right? And we know that sometimes this is still present today too. Ashley and I have talked a lot recently about differences and disparities and what it may be like for someone like me, for instance. I'm a white woman, to show up and present at a hospital with an issue versus maybe a woman of color, and just sometimes how different treatment and different responses may show up, how that impacts then the healthcare we have access to, the treatment we have access to, and our likelihood to come back and continue to talk about our needs with a provider. So that's definitely something that's really present in our minds. We also hear from survivors a lot this sense of, they don't really see me, they don't see my whole person. We know that healthcare providers, you all have a ton to get through in a short amount of time, that there's increased pressure to talk about a lot of things with your patients, to screen for different things, to meet those needs in a manner that is both efficient and effective. And sometimes, unintentionally, a ramification of that is that survivors feel like maybe they're not being seen in a holistic way. And so we hear that they feel rushed, and they don't always want to take more time to burden a provider with sharing information about violence or trauma or disability in that moment. We also know that a lot of times there is an assumption by folks that the victim survivor, so the patient, that their partner is a safe partner. I will share from my own experience. I definitely had that moment where I'm in an ER, I have an issue going on, and somebody asked me in front of my partner if I was safe at home, right? And so we know, we can all see immediately why that's not best practice, right? Because how would I ever be okay to answer yes to that question with my partner in the room? We also see a lot that we know people who use violence can present like the nicest people in the world, right? They're not walking around being angry and violent and malicious to people all the time. They're not wearing signs that say, hey, I use violence at home. And so they can present really well and present like caring partners. And it can be easy for a provider to want to jump in and support that role, right? And so to trust that partner's assessment of what's going on, to trust them with managing care. And I think that this does come in even more significantly when you're talking about people with disabilities, because there is a corresponding bias here sometimes that we have, particularly with different types of disabilities, that person may not be as capable, right? So we may be more likely to lean on their partner for their care and managing their health needs. And then lastly, just the issue of inaccessibility. I have so many stories that I hear from folks about just like what it takes for them, the incredible amount of work it can take to get themselves transported from their home, their residence, to a medical appointment, to a hospital, to a treatment provider, just because of needs around access, transportation, mobility, again, vision. Just sharing from my own example with hearing, I present as a very able-bodied person. I have been in environments where I have no idea what a provider is saying to me because I just can't quite make it out. So there's all kinds of things going on for people with ability and access that we don't always see or recognize. And what that can do is by the time someone shows up to your office, they may already be drained, they may already be exhausted. They may have already experienced triggering of their own trauma in that process to get there. And so an extra lens of sort of patience, and I think grace with patients in your office can be really, really helpful and really create an opportunity for survivors to be seen and recognized for the effort they've gone through, and then to work on a care plan with you and feel trusted with you to share if violence is interfering with that care plan or if disability is interfering with that care plan. So please just kind of hold those things in your mind as we go through the rest of the presentation here about best practices and ways to respond. I think they'll really help ground us with some of that.
I'm going to talk a little bit about how abusive people may leverage disability kind of within their abuse tactics. So there's so much to cover here, and I'm just going to gloss over it in the interest of time. So controlling access. We've talked a lot about accessibility and how it's kind of like the lifeblood to getting help, to getting services, and abusers will cut that off. So they may break medical equipment, not allow someone to have medical equipment accessible to them. They may not schedule appointments or cancel appointments. They may control access to support or to the community. There's a caregiver nexus here. So if the abuser is also the caregiver, care can be considered a burden or a sacrifice or both. And the care can be this site of manipulation. So maybe it goes real hand in hand with financial control and exploitation. Maybe it's if you don't sign this check over, or if I don't get your next Social Security check, then I'm not going to bathe you. I'm not going to feed you. I'm not going to allow you to talk to your grandchildren, whatever it may be. Threats, so threatening to report someone to protective services, threatening to leave someone without care, threatening to institutionalize someone. These are all really, really big threats that folks are very, very scared of. So fear is very present here, and threats of really removing freedom, choice, autonomy, right? That's what is the threat is here. Financial control and exploitation. So if healthcare is dependent on the abuser's insurance, then that really limits the ability of someone to leave, right? Especially if they need that care to survive. And then we sometimes have people on public benefits who would like to get married, who cannot get married because they would lose their benefits and access to maybe life-giving care if they did get married, right? So people with disabilities can be in these catch-22s where you don't really have the freedom that other people have because of your medical needs, because of the way that our insurance system is set up in America. And then lastly, sexual abuse tactics. I mentioned this earlier that I think people just miss this as a real thing that does happen to people, specifically people with disabilities, disproportionately people with disabilities. So disabled people are not seen as sexual beings too often. And so people will maybe not consider that this could happen to them or that people would desire them in that way. And that sexual abuse also does not always have to do with desire, right? So we're talking about control techniques. We're not talking about necessarily acting on attraction. Not to say that people with disabilities are not attractive, two separate things here. And then people with disabilities often don't receive sexual health education, so they might not know, like I said earlier, what healthy sexuality looks like, or that they have a right to healthy sexuality. And then some providers may not consider sexual abuse possible, and I put it in air quotes, right? Possible for people with disabilities, which is of course untrue and not the case.
So just to bring this in, building off of what Ashley's just talked about, to a couple of specific examples as well that are really timely, right? We're all still in the middle of dealing with a global pandemic. And we know that abusive people will use any number of things to leverage power and control, just like we saw in that last slide. COVID-19 is no different. We are absolutely seeing examples of this all the time. The way that abusive people are leveraging the impact of this pandemic. They're leveraging the isolation, they're leveraging the fear and real legitimate risk to people's health and wellness. They're leveraging people's economic insecurity during this time. So there's a lot going on. And when this pandemic started, there was a lot of news coverage around domestic violence is increasing. What are we going to do about it? And what we know in the field, what we know really well, is that it wasn't that new domestic violence cases were popping up. It was that we were seeing domestic violence, we were seeing power and control that was now escalating in severity and intensity because there was something new to leverage, right? And there was this new dynamic at play. And so what we've seen is an increase in physical violence, the severity of that physical violence. We've seen an increase in homicides and in suicide homicides in domestic violence relationships, which is it's awful. It's something our community is really grappling with right now. There was just a new study, and I'm sorry I didn't include it in here. It just came out last week, but some of you may have seen it, which was a sort of evaluation of people coming in to ERs and to healthcare settings with injuries from domestic violence. And they compared that to time pre-pandemic and seeing the physical impacts really escalating, that the severity of physical injury to people has gotten worse during pandemic. We also know, I have these two quotes down at the bottom, and I will just read them out loud in case anybody is unable to read them and see them, because they are directly survivor experience as reported on the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And I think they're important to get us a glimpse of how this is playing out. So one person, a caller, was experiencing an escalation of abuse. They had tested positive for COVID-19, and the abuser was using isolation to keep them from contacting family. The abuser threatened the survivor with deportation. Survivor is currently in the process of becoming a U.S. citizen. So we see that that nexus and that intersection of pandemic with that oppression around somebody not being a citizen of the United States coming together and increasing domestic violence. The other one says chatter, and I'll just clarify that they use the term chatter because they also take text and chat messages at the national hotline. So they say a chatter stated that they have known for a long time that there were red flags in the relationship, but things are escalating with the pandemic and they can't even go to therapy. So that really highlights to us that direct impact on people's mental health and emotional well-being, right? During this time, as they're seeing things escalate and have fewer access to people who might be support and fewer opportunity to reach out to talk about that and to navigate that and to get help with that. So we just want to highlight that too now as you're seeing folks. This is also coming up with contact tracing. We've had some issues looking at what does it mean to ask somebody on the other end of that call about where they're staying. What if they're staying in a confidential shelter, right? And they can't disclose that. What does that mean for the survivor who wants to help with contact tracing for COVID-19, but also has this dual life situation going on? So a lot of this is really escalating in our current time.
So we're gonna switch gears a little bit here from presenting all the troubles in the world to presenting some of the solutions or some of the tips and tricks that we believe might alleviate some of the troubles, I guess. So I presented earlier on a vicious cycle, and this slide here, first of all, it's about working at this intersection that we've been talking about, and it presents a new cycle. So it says a new cycle in the middle, and it has the same first step, which is basically a person experiences trauma, chronic stress, or adversity. The next step is that that person seeks help, and while we know that might not always happen, in this case it did, and then the person is asked what happened to you. And this is a really good trauma-informed care trick. I hope that you have heard the term trauma-informed care before, but if you haven't, it's basically this idea of us making our services, our interactions, our waiting rooms, our physical spaces as non-triggering as possible. So as comforting, as welcoming, as what we say trauma-informed, with this operating from this understanding that people are walking in our door, having experienced or currently experiencing trauma. So this question of what happened to you is opening the door for folks to share, right? It's acknowledging that there has been trauma and that you are interested in hearing about it. Once you learn what has happened, services and supports can then be designed to lessen the impact of trauma and to build the resiliency of the individual who has experienced trauma. you can tailor your services, you can tailor your treatment to address this trauma. When that happens, the patient is going to experience less stress, more healing, more recovery, better health, more efficient and effective services. It's really a win for everyone. And then if the person does experience additional trauma, stress, or adversity, they're likely to reach out again. But hopefully they don't. I mean, hopefully, we're all going to experience it, right? But hopefully maybe we're lessening the amount of trauma in this person's life. So some tips for working at the intersection is, first of all, to believe survivors. I think that this is important. And I really want to use the term survivor actually quite broadly. So we are talking about domestic violence survivors here, but a person with a disability is very often a survivor of their disability, of this world. Most of us are survivors of many things. Believe people. If someone comes in and they're saying something is not right in my body, maybe your test doesn't show it, but can you further believe them that something doesn't feel right for them, right? That something is wrong. Instead of operating from this stance of, no, you're wrong, it's, yes, I believe you, and what can we do next? Trusting people as experts in their own life. If we're talking about a domestic violence survivor, if we're talking about someone with a disability, if we're talking about working at that intersection, we need to trust people that they actually do know how to navigate their life, that they have survived this long. When we're talking about a dangerous situation, I actually don't know what the abuser, what may trigger the abuser to escalate violence, right? The survivor really knows that. And so trusting them that they are experts in their own safety and that they are experts in their own accessibility and their own care needs. And listening to the survivor, even if there is a caregiver present, right? How do we elevate the voice of the person most impacted? And that is always the patient. Going slower and being patient. I know that's a lot easier said than done, as Shannon mentioned, but it's what we really, really regularly hear from people who have disabilities who are navigating systems. And then I just say to stay curious, right? While any medical person, any professional brings a lot of expertise into the room, when we're acknowledging that another person also has expertise, then we can bring our own curiosity around their life, around their experiences, around their wants and dreams, and around what they feel they are capable of, right? Like to what degree can they really digest and integrate treatment options into their life right now? And maybe it's not 100%, maybe it's starting with 20% and then working up to 30, 40, 50, right? And then just kind of lastly, going back to the point of that vicious cycle I presented, disability services that don't acknowledge and address trauma, they're going to miss the mark. And not only are they going to miss the mark, but oftentimes they're going to be more expensive and less effective, because disability services might have, it could be like a day treatment that has like a 1-to-4 provider to patient ratio. And that might be much more costly than a trauma support group that has a 1-to-12 ratio or something. And so when we are working with limited resources, as we are so often working in our current systems, how can we leverage what we know to really offer more effective and potentially less expensive resources for folks? So something to consider. Shannon is going to give you some more tips for working with domestic violence.
Yeah, so I've been really fortunate and really lucky over the years to work a lot with different healthcare providers, clinics, hospitals around this intersection of disability and health. And one of the questions that comes up a lot from providers is really questions around screening or asking, right? So even if you're not formally screening, which is fine, like if you do have a concern or if you're noticing something, how do I ask about it? People want to know, what's the best way? What's the way to say it where I'm not going to offend somebody or I'm not going to do more harm? And so I just want to share here that it's really, really critical to keep in mind that the purpose of asking about domestic violence is not to get a disclosure, right? The purpose is never to try to pull it out of them. The purpose is really just to create an environment where patients know that you all recognize domestic violence is common, you care about how it's impacting your patients, and you're there to talk about it and try to provide assistance and connection if they want to talk about it. So it's really about creating that environment. And if somebody does answer the question, you know, if you ask about domestic violence and they say, nope, everything's fine, I'm not experiencing it, and you're still concerned, that's okay. Domestic violence may be there. Survivors have a lot of reasons to not always feel safe to disclose the first time they're asked. But it's again about setting that tone and environment. What we know is that survivors often say they didn't disclose the first time they were asked, but it planted something in their mind. It planted that idea that that person noticed me, that person cared, and so they may go back later and then talk about it at a later date when they're feeling more ready. We also know that how you ask is just as important as what you ask, right? So I'm going to share another experience from my past just because I don't have to get permission from anyone else to share my own experiences, right? I can share those with you freely without worry about confidentiality. So I will share that I remember another time I was at a doctor's office, wonderful doctor, lovely woman. And she was going through sort of a screen with me. And she said, and I quote, now I have to ask about this, but you're not experiencing domestic violence, right? Now it's that tone, it is that assumption of course this isn't happening to you. I would never have felt comfortable then to come back and say, well, actually I am, right? Because I was already sent the message that she assumed I was not and probably wasn't ready or prepared for then a positive answer on my end. So just thinking about, it's not only what we ask, it's how we ask it. It's that relational approach, it's that open approach. And what we often refer to is just like a universal approach, just knowing how common trauma and violence is, that we're just going to assume anyone sitting in front of us may have experienced it, right? Which leads me to the next slide, which are just some examples of how you may ask these questions. And we do not need to go through every single dot point on this slide, but I want to highlight a couple because what we often hear in healthcare settings is that folks are asked some version of a formal screening question of like, are you safe at home? Has your partner ever hit you or intimidated you? There's the HIT screening that's really popular. What I want to offer here with this slide is that as you're building relationship with your patients, there are ways that really will fit in and intersect with the work you're doing on their healthcare and on their wellness plans that may make asking those questions a little more natural and a little more helpful to that survivor on the other end. So for instance, there's a question in here, has your partner ever tampered with your birth control or tried to get you pregnant when you didn't want to be? So if you're in a reproductive health clinic or you're talking to someone about their sexual health, this can be one of those things where you say, a lot of people I've worked with have talked about having their birth control tampered with. Has your partner ever done that to you, right? So this is a much more universal approach. It's letting that person know you've seen this, you recognize this. You're not just asking because something about them is triggering everything in you to ask. It's just part of your process with them. Another example here, just want to highlight one more. Has your partner ever prevented you from using a wheelchair, a cane, a respirator, or another assistive device? So if you're working with somebody with a disability on their access needs and their health needs, this is a really important question to ask at times, right? Does your partner support your access to your medical devices, to your medication? Have they ever interfered or prevented you from getting what you need with that? And that can really highlight sometimes and be an opener in a conversation, also with words that are much less scary and much more loaded than things like, are you experiencing domestic violence? Has someone hit you? Those can feel very, very loaded. And these are ways that are really looking at all of those other examples of power and control that may exist around and in addition to physical violence. So just some examples there. We'll go on to the next slide. This slide has some colorful quotation boxes on it. If we were together in person, we would have a conversation about this together, and we can't do that in this format. But left this in here because I want to ask you to consider these questions as we move through the next couple slides about resources and about responding to any disclosures. So just keep in mind, what do you know to be some best practices if someone discloses domestic violence to you? What have you heard today in this webinar already? What have you heard from the folks at CAP? What have you heard from other places and other training? What's important to say or do in those moments, right? Practice makes perfect. It's a cheesy expression, but I believe that it's true, that the first few times we're sort of faced with talking about violence with people, it can feel awkward and we don't know what to say and we stumble. And the more we sort of think about, okay, what can I actually say in response that will feel good and feel helpful, the more prepared you can be when those moments do come with a patient. And then lastly, just keep in mind, how might someone's disability impact your response? And it may not. Sometimes it's not going to impact anything at all, and that's fine. Sometimes, though, it may cause you or prompt you to think about how that abusive person may be leveraging that disability, or how that abuse may interfere with the person's medical care and access needs, right? So just considering if that is connected as we go through these. All right, so this is just kind of a quick cheat sheet. It is by no means all-inclusive and all-encompassing in things to say and do with survivors, but it does cover a few basic things that really will help set you on a good trajectory, I think. So as Ashley was saying earlier, believe them, believe them, believe them, believe them. Even if something seems inconsistent or off, it is probably that survivor's truth. It is probably their experience, the way that they have internalized it and the way that they have experienced it. So we want to believe them and never give any doubt that we doubt their story, their experience of violence. You want to listen really well. It's human nature, I think, to want to jump to asking questions right away when someone's disclosing. And what we want to do is really listen and give somebody a chance in that moment to tell us what they feel is important to tell us about the harm they've experienced. That can help then guide and direct our intervention or the resources we connect them with. We want to be mindful of their emotional safety. We also often jump right to physical safety, right? Well, did you get injured? Are you okay? Do you need any medical care in that way? But as survivors may share or talk about their experience of violence, it's likely that they're going to have those triggers of trauma in their brains and in their minds. So checking in with folks, helping them recenter and ground and breathe and all of those things that we know help us when we're feeling triggered. As Ashley talked about, honoring their expertise, they know what's right for them. That's really, really important. And then supporting them with what comes next. So in the avoid category here, we want to avoid victim blaming and judgments. A lot of people don't always realize they're victim blaming because language of victim blaming is so steeped in our culture that we don't even realize we're doing it. It really takes some conscious practice. One of the most common examples of that is to avoid questions like, well, why haven't you left, right? Why are you still there? To a survivor, that often feels like they're somehow made to be at fault. When really the question or what we're trying to get at might be phrased something like, what is it that you're needing now? What is this relationship serving you? How is this relationship affecting your life, right? You're trying to figure out what's going on for them. Why they've stayed or why they left may or may not be relevant to the conversation at the time. So also on here, don't name call the abusive person. This seems really simple, but it is really easy to get into a pattern of saying like that person sounds really terrible, and what we want to do is focus on the behaviors. That person's behaviors are really terrible. What they did to you is absolutely unacceptable. Because we always know that those behaviors are not okay. No one deserves violence. No one deserves abuse ever. Avoiding platitudes, when we get uncomfortable. There's that really popular Brene Brown video out there that I'm sure many of you have seen about, no good sentence ever really starts with at least. That's not usually an empathetic sentence if you say at least and then follow that up. So we want to really focus on avoiding those. And if you don't know what to say, if somebody shares something awful with you, I think it is absolutely okay to just say, that sounds really awful. I don't even know what to say right now. and to just sit with them with that, and then move forward when you both are ready together. And then in that last category, you can also say directly things like, this was not your fault, and I'm worried about your safety. I put these in here in quotes because what I hear from folks often is that we tend to just believe our body language and our empathetic facial expressions and tone are conveying these things. And survivors actually say it was so helpful to hear those words, right? To have somebody reflect back to you, this was not your fault, you did not deserve this. So if you don't say anything else, know that that statement and that expression can be really helpful. And then finally, I just want to say, ask only questions that are relevant to current needs. So we don't need to go always into their detailed trauma history if we know we're just going to be sort of referring them and passing them off to a domestic violence advocate, because they'll do that with the advocate, right? So let's not make them dive into that twice or more than they have to, which then leads us into the next slide. Connecting with healthcare and advocacy. So we're going to wrap up here in the next couple slides before Q&A. And I just want to highlight a couple of things about advocacy. Domestic violence advocates in the community can really be a game changer. They have work and roles and experience that is very different from sort of a generalized social worker. So sometimes people may have a social worker at a hospital that they work with, but an advocate might be another person that they want to bring in to their support circle. Domestic violence advocates who work at qualified domestic violence agencies are not mandatory reporters of abuse, which is huge for many survivors of violence who also have disabilities. Because one of the biggest barriers is people being afraid they're going to get reported to Adult Protective Services, an investigation is going to ensue, they may feel out of control, and like that can increase risk or harm. So if you believe that someone is afraid to talk about what's happening to them or has that as a concern, you can always say there are advocates in the community who don't have that requirement. You can share with them openly, and they're never gonna make a mandatory report because it's actually against their process and their codes of ethics and their actually legal protections as domestic violence advocates. So it's really important that they can have that space if they need to be completely open. And finally, I just want to say that advocates come with really a whole specialized set of skills, really in-depth training. We definitely encourage people from a lot of social service and health fields to get some basic training in domestic violence. But as an advocate, you are getting in-depth training for your first many years on the job and then hopefully beyond. So you're learning about how this stuff really plays out, and that can be really helpful if a patient needs somebody to really do in-depth safety planning with, to think about what to do, where to go, and how to keep themselves as safe as possible from harm. And they also may have access to specialized resources. I mean, just frankly, right? Financial resources, safe housing, things like that. So helping make those connections to advocates is really, really important for a lot of folks. And on the next slide are a couple of resources that we wanted to sort of make sure we left you with. So as you'll see at the bottom here, OHSU members on this webinar, if you are an OHSU member and you are experiencing any of this stuff, you can always contact the CAP program directly and talk with one of their outstanding advocates and get support from there. If you're talking with a patient or anyone else who may want to go outside of the OHSU community directly to a community organization, you'll see Call to Safety and Linea Unica, these 24-hour hotlines up here. Now, there's a whole bunch of organizations in Portland, but we want to really highlight those two as like the 24-hour entry points to the system. So if you don't know where to send somebody, send them there, right? And they do basically the same things. The only difference is that Unica is always going to have staff that's answering that phone who is bilingual and bicultural. So if you have somebody who speaks Spanish or prefers to talk to somebody that they know is from their Spanish Latinx community, then by all means refer them to Unica. I'm going to let Ashley talk here about the disability resources in just a second, and I'm just going to skip down to the national resources quickly before I stop. I just wanted to leave these two national resources here. So there's the Center for IPV, Intimate Partner Violence and Health, and the National Center for DV Trauma and Mental Health. Both of those organizations are powerhouses of resources for healthcare providers and for domestic violence advocates working together. And I would just highly encourage anyone who wants more information to check them out. And then on the right side, you'll see this co-located DV advocacy at OHSU's Richmond Clinic. So if you didn't know this was there, this is a partnership between your own Richmond Clinic and our nonprofit providers, Volunteers of America Home Free, in the community. And they actually have advocates embedded. They work at the Richmond Clinic, but they're advocates who are employed by Home Free, which is a really great program and really innovative. And their contact information is on this slide, so you are always welcome to contact them directly as well.
I just realized I didn't actually finish updating the slide. So my two resources don't have phone numbers on them right now. Apologies, and you will have to do some Googling, it looks like. So the first resource I want to talk about is the Aging Disability Resource Connection. It is often referred to as ADRC, and it is a line that is run by Multnomah County Aging, Disability, and Veterans Services Division. And it's a good go-to, almost like a 211 for aging and disability resources in the Portland metro area. So if you're looking for an additional resource or additional agency that we didn't put up here, or if you want to know if something exists, that's a good number to call. And then Disability Awareness Resource Team, also known as DART or Project DART, they work at the intersection of domestic violence and disability. So there is an agency that is serving folks who are falling into this category. They work out of the Gateway Center, which is a one-stop shop for domestic violence survivors in Portland. It's in East Portland, Burnside, and 102nd area. DART is a great resource. They can be those advocates that Shannon kind of described, and they can also get folks hooked up with other resources. They're doing virtual work right now. So you can go to their website, and they also have a phone number that I don't know off the top of my head, but Google does know that. You want to remind us about CAP, Shannon? Well, just at the bottom here, a reminder that if you are an OHSU member, you can contact CAP. So CAP is there for you all, as well as the advocates that we also mentioned and the lines that we gave you numbers for. And we made it. We did such good timing. I'm very proud of us. We are at the questions segment. We have about 12 minutes left.
Yeah, thank you so much, you all. This is Jackson. I'm a confidential advocate. My pronouns are they and them. I'm with the Confidential Advocacy Program. And we did have 2 questions come in for you all. Give me just a moment. So the first one is, can you speak to how often someone who experiences domestic violence or sexual assault would then, as a result, develop a disability?
I can speak to it. I'm not sure how often that happens so far as like prevalence in an actual statistic, but that is a really good point that I forgot to mention, that when we're talking about disability, some people are born with disability and some people develop disability later in life, and some people develop disability as a result of their domestic violence. So traumatic brain injuries are unfortunately quite common as a result from domestic violence. So being punched in the head, kicked in the head, having your head hit the ground or a wall, and that really often goes undiagnosed. That oftentimes people do not understand that they're dealing with a more organic or bodily injury rather than just an effect of the trauma. And so as much as you all can help suss that out, what is trauma here and what is a physical injury, that's quite helpful. Obviously broken arms, broken legs, more temporary injuries are going to be more common, but people end up in wheelchairs. People end up needing to use canes or other mobility devices for the rest of their life. And I don't know, Shannon, do you have a magic stat that I don't have?
I don't have a magic stat, but I just wanted to add to that one of the, well, 2 of the types of disability that we haven't really talked a ton about today specifically are also addiction. Substance use can be a disability, and HIV, AIDS, or other STIs. And we know that both of those can really be significantly connected to intimate partner violence oftentimes. We see the use of HIV status of one partner intentionally trying to infect another. We see that, unfortunately, quite often. And a lot of times there is a connection too between an abusive person trying to escalate and intensify substance use or get somebody addicted, like chemically addicted to a substance, because it increases their ability to control. So those are also just two ways that can play out. I just wanted to
add. Thank you very much, both of you. And then the second question we have is, can you also speak to the positive impacts that healthcare providers can have and have had on the lives of survivors with disabilities?
And then I can let you take that one first.
Okay, absolutely. So as I think I said in there, right, that we know that healthcare providers are sort of that second category that often do get disclosures after friends or family. And they're, I mean, just personally from experience, I can say that I've worked with a lot of folks, a lot of survivors who shared how that went really well, right? Like how they talked to their provider, they disclosed, it may have come up for treatment for something completely different, but because they had built an established relationship, they sort of did talk about that or disclose that. And that has shown like really incredible positive impact on them. What survivors will often say is that by being believed and by being heard by this person with such authority, with such sort of, you know, this position of authority and power, that felt really, really validating, and often gave them sort of the courage and the impetus to then continue to talk about it and continue to get help where they needed it. So that is a really wonderful opportunity and impact that I think all of you have. So even if you're not doing directly work then on domestic violence with that person, it's that moment of relationship and disclosure and believing and being heard, particularly backed up by, I think, the authority that healthcare providers hold. That is really powerful. And then if you say something, as many survivors have shared, along the lines of, well, did you know there's domestic violence advocates, and would you like a phone number before you left? Then you're making that connection, which often leads to a lot of resource and support for survivors. I've also seen wonderful, wonderful medical providers that really get in it with advocates as a way to strategize for exit plans for people trying to leave relationships that are dangerous. So providers and advocates have worked together before to say, you know, a survivor can't ever be alone, can't leave their house because the abuser is controlling them so much. But the one time they're able to be alone is when they go visit their doctor, right? They're going in for an annual checkup or whatever that is. And so survivors and medical staff have worked together before to say, okay, we're going to get that person, we're going to bring the advocate in to the clinic so that they can meet with that person privately and safely, because that might be the only opportunity they have. And then they can use a space in our clinic to make that safety plan and to make that exit plan and to help get them the support they need. Did you have anything else, Ashley?
I was just going to also highlight the authority as a medical person that you really have in someone's life, and in just the juxtaposition between what is often happening in the relationship around kind of like brainwashing tactics. So like, it's not that bad, you don't deserve better. Having someone with authority, and when we did a lot of screening work when I worked for Clackamas County, we focused on clergy and medical staff, right? So the people who have kind of like this natural assumed authority in folks' life, if that person can say something different than the abuser is saying, it can create cognitive dissonance that might not in that moment cause change, but like Shannon said earlier, plant the seed. So really like leveraging your power in this relationship to provide a different message than the abuser is like really pounding in there. So again, that it's not your fault, believing someone and partnering as best you can. Yeah. Jackson, are there any other questions?
I don't know if Jackson's still here. We might have lost them. Well, if we did, I know, I just want to say thank you, everyone who has tuned in. Again, if there's anything else after this, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to do any post-presentation chat and work. And really, I want to thank you. You all might be hearing this a lot right now, so I'm sorry if it's repetitive, but I just have so much gratitude and appreciation for healthcare workers who are continuing to show up for people in all of these ways, just given the extra extreme circumstances we are under right now. And if there's anything that we can do to help support you in that work, please let us know.
Great. Thank you both so much today. It was wonderful to have you, Ashley and Shannon. And if anyone does have any additional questions, please keep sending those to capsupport@ohsu.edu, and we're happy to connect you with those answers. Yeah, thank you both so much, and take care.